who can be a power of attorney and when is the best time to appoint one?
When was the best time to appoint one? Was yesterday, but let's go from there on that one.
Welcome to Aging Vibrantly, Conversations to Empower Seniors, an Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario podcast. I am Rayanne Rideout, the host of the show, where we amplify the voices of seniors who impart their expertise and wisdom to enhance our understanding of aging issues and ways of living a safe and fulfilling life with respect and dignity. On today's episode, we're going to talk about an important legal matter, and that is having a power of attorney document, or what is often referred to as a PoA. To give our listeners a better understanding of making a power of attorney, we'll start with a basic overview on the importance of having one, how to choose an attorney, what their roles and responsibilities are, and protections that you can put into place to avoid the misuse of your PoA to ensure your attorney acts in your best interests. A reminder that our discussion on powers of attorney is within a Canadian context. Each province and territory has specific legislation, so we encourage you to look at the legislation wherever you reside. Before we launch into our episode and welcome our guest, I want to introduce my co-host today, Leo Bunnell, who is a member of our podcast Senior Advisory Committee. Over the last 20 years since his retirement as a bank manager, he has been an active volunteer taking on various leadership roles at a national, provincial, and even community level to advocate for older adults in his home province of Newfoundland. In fact, he is currently active providing education on elder abuse prevention, preventing financial abuse to seniors. So thank you, Leo, for joining me today. I trust this is going to be an enlightening conversation with our guest today. And who better to discuss this matter than Laura Tamblyn Watts, a lawyer, an elder law expert, and CEO of CanAge, Canada's national seniors advocacy organization. Laura is also an assistant professor in the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto, where she teaches law and aging. She has leveraged her expertise to advance the interests of seniors, serving as a national director of the Canadian Centre for Elder Law and as a chief public officer at CARP. Her influence is felt nationally and internationally through her active and impactful consumer advocacy work defending the rights of older people. Her compassionate service is evident through her board membership, including Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. Most recently, her book, Let's Talk About Aging Parents, a real-life guide to solving problems with 27 essential conversations, reflects her engaging approach to discussing the complexities of aging. She is truly dedicated to enhancing the lives of seniors across Canada and beyond. So welcome, Laura. It's a pleasure to have you join us today on our podcast, Aging Vibrantly. We are so excited to have you today as a lawyer and elder law expert, and also as a colleague who we worked many years in the area of elder abuse prevention, both Leo and I. So we're pleased that you're able to come today to talk about this important conversation around powers of attorney that many people have a lot of questions about on a regular basis, not knowing sort of what to do and how it works. And so we're going to go through all those logistics, hopefully in our conversation today, to give people a little better understanding of the issue, but also to empower older adults to better protect what their rights are and their financial security, because we know, I know in our field that we know financial abuse is the most prevalent form of abuse that we see happening, and we want to make sure that seniors have the financial security as they age. So I know that you recently wrote a book that had a chapter on powers of attorney called Let's Talk About Aging Parents, a real guide to solving problems with 27 essential conversations. So hopefully we'll be able to allude to that book as we go through this podcast today, which giving people some other tips and advice. And I know from our experience that Leo has in his background, he'll also be able to speak to his expertise as a retired banker in the area of finances as well. So I'm going to ask Leo maybe just to start our conversation off.
Well, our first topic, Laura, we know there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding about the powers of attorney by seniors, family members, and even providers, even caregiver providers. So we're trying to understand what it is, who to trust, and whose directions to take. So can you explain what a power of attorney is and why people as they get older should need one?
Yes, I think I could probably give that talk every single day of the year because it is so important for folks to get right. Okay, so I'm going to use some really basics. I'm going to put my hands up here, and if you're watching it, you'll see my hands. If not, if you're listening to it, I'll tell you what I'm doing with my hands. So I think of a power of attorney is a document that you make now being hopefully when you're an adult and you're mentally capable, although before coffee in the morning, I'm not sure I could pass some of those tests, right? When it's an adult, when you're mentally capable. So if you get hit by a bus and you're completely unconscious, you're scraped off the road and you're taken to the hospital, and someone needs to say, okay, are we going to chop her leg off? Do we need to have surgery? That they have the right person to talk to. Or they do the same thing and I'm in a coma and someone needs to pay my mortgage and my bills, that the right person will do it. Now, that's a very black and white answer. And of course, what we know is it is often far more complicated than that. Anyone who's ever got any dementia in their family, and I got both my hands up on that on both sides of my family, will know that sometimes you're better in the morning, maybe not as good in the evening. Maybe you're capable of some things and not capable of others, right? So I'm just going to use that black and white to start with, and then maybe, Leo, you and I could talk a little bit about what to do with the gray. What it is not. It is not a document that you need to make when you're unconscious because you can't, because you're unconscious, right? It's got to be on the other side of the street before you've been hit by that bus, okay? It's also not the thing when you're dead. So that is a will. And I want us to think about it in black and white. Perfectly capable walking across the street. You make your own decisions. You tell your banker, you tell your lawyer, you tell your, doctor, you tell whatever legal kind of decisions you want to have made. You're the person to decide that. Hit by a bus, completely unconscious, you have to pick the right person. Here's what you also need to know, and Leo, you know this very, very well. A big surprise to people. In most jurisdictions in the country, there's a default list for that health and personal care. Someone will make a decision for you about that surgery. There's no default provision for that mortgage, that bill, that financial issue. I'm going to say that again. There will be a default person. If you didn't make a power of attorney document on the one side of the street when you're a mentally capable adult, there will be someone. It's a bit of a different answer in different jurisdictions, but it's usually something like your spouse or partner first, and maybe your adult kids or your parents or siblings. It's something like that. A little bit different in every jurisdiction, right? But if not, it's got to go to the public guardian and trustee for a financial decision, and then they take over. So it's really, really important stuff.
Wow. Well, there are two types of power of attorney, one being the personal care and the other one being property. So having, say, both a power of attorney in place, it's key. And as you mentioned, because we want to have someone we trust to make decisions on our behalf, if we're not able to, as you alluded to, given that these there are two different legal documents, both of equal importance with specific legislation. Today, we're going to focus on the power of attorney for property.
Sure.
So now that we understand what a power of attorney is, who can be a power of attorney, and when is the best time to appoint one?
When was the best time to appoint one? Was yesterday, but let's go from there on that one. So the first thing I want to say is that the word power of attorney is pretty much the same across the country. So if you're in Newfoundland, Labrador, somebody else is in BC, someone's in Ontario, and you say, we're doing a power of attorney, they understand that for property. They may call it a continuing power of attorney. In Ontario, they may call it an enduring power of attorney in other jurisdictions, but we mean the same thing, okay? I just want to flag that if you're listening or you're from a different jurisdiction, you got family somewhere else, they may use a different name for that one about your body, okay? So in BC, they'll call it a representation agreement. Nova Scotia, it's going to be a personal directive, right? They call them different things. Ontario, we call it a power of attorney for personal care. So let's talk finance. So the first thing that's important to know is people will say, power of attorney for property. I don't own any property. I don't need one. Okay. Right. Well, you do. You're probably wearing at least, articles of clothing. You've probably got, some jewelry. You might have a car. Even if you don't have what lawyers like us call real property. That means like a physical piece of property, a house or something, or a condo or something like that. Even if you don't own your place that you live, that's only one kind of property. It's your money in your account. It's your investments, RSPs, TFSAs, RIFs, all of those acronyms that we all use, right? It's also that wedding ring, right? It's that wedding ring. And it's your digital assets, it's your passwords, it's your Aeroplan points or whatever it is also. So think about your power of attorney for property as all of your stuff. Many people will think to themselves, well, I got my wife, my husband, my partner, they'll be able to do it. No. So I'll just use my husband as an example. I love the man. I trust him. You're asking, who do you trust? This one, I have a good relationship. He's a financial guy, so I feel like he'd be able to do it. We have a couple things in joint, which means that we both own it. But I have a checking account that's my own. I've got my own RSPs and so on. That's just in my name. Unless I appoint him as my attorney for property, he can't do anything. It would still go to the public guardian and trustee. That's a big shock for people, right? If it's only in my name, nobody else can do it unless I appoint somebody. Now, Leo, you asked the important question. Who do you pick? Right. And I go through this in my book. Now, so I think we have to acknowledge not everyone has this perfect leave it to beaver kind of family. In fact, I actually don't know anyone with one of those families, but the reality of circumstance is you kind of got to work with what you got. First of all, it's a lot easier if they live in the same jurisdiction, at least the same country as you, okay? These days for money, you can do a lot of stuff online. So it's not maybe as important that they be really close by as it would be for if they're making decisions about your body or your care. You got to really lay eyes on the person and see how they're doing. We can do a lot of stuff, payments now on the phone, on your online banking, investments, but still, it's easier if they're in the jurisdiction that you're in, right? So if I was helping somebody with 8 kids, 2 of them lived in India. I'm like, not ideal. 2 of them lived in, Quebec and BC. I'm like, well, maybe, right? And then one of them was in jail for fraud. I'm like, not you. And you go down. And at the end of it, we had a conversation and I said, well, why are you only thinking about your kids? And Leo, this is a really important point. She was wanting to pick to them to be an attorney because she thought it was an expression of saying that, she loves them or that she cares about them or she trusts them. I was like, listen, anyone who's ever been a decision maker for somebody else, like the best expression of love would be pick somebody else to do it. It's a big trouble. And she, in the end, did something that many, I think more Canadians are going to be doing who have a bit of some assets, right? She picked a trust company. So in her case, she went to one of the big banks who have a trust company and she actually appointed the trust company. She didn't want any of her kids running it. And I think it's important to remember that you don't have to just think of your family. And the last thing I would just say is that's also really important for our increasing solo seniors. Lots of people have outlived everybody or they come from somewhere else and they moved here and they don't really have anyone. So a good solution for them would be to have a conversation with a trust company. One of those big banks, they always have trust companies as well. And that's an option for them only for the property stuff,
Yes.
Not for the personal care or your body stuff. Yeah.
Speak to me about the fact that people do appoint power of attorneys that in some cases they really don't have the capacity, they don't have the understanding of what their responsibilities are as a power of attorney. Can you talk to me about that?
Oh, Leo, that's so important. So first of all, I think if everyone really knew what their job was, they'd probably never say yes to the appointment of it. It's actually a giant pain. I think you got to call it like it is. And then people are ready for it, okay?
Yeah.
So you can't mix money. That's the most important thing. So when you're thinking about who do you pick, you're going to pick your scrupulous person, okay? Who's that person that gets their taxes done 3 months ahead of time? It's not me. I get them in, but it's often like, just in time, right?
Deadline.
Yeah, there's a deadline for a reason, right? But my dad will have his taxes filed at 8 a.m. the very first day that it can be filed, right? Someone like that, scrupulous, somebody who's good. If you have the option in your circle who's good at kind of accounting. Now, I'm not talking really complicated accounting, but just dollars in and dollars out, right? You can't put, oh, you know what? I'm just gonna spend mom's money, or I'm just gonna do it, and it's fine. No, every time you need to spend something, you have to account for it. Now, these days, it's a little bit easier. You can do electronic accounting and so on, but you can't mix it up, right? So I would say scrupulous person, the person who is good at tracking things. And one of the realities of the circumstances is that they have the time to do it. A little bit, they need some time to do it. Most people are just trying to live their lives. Like, they never think about this stuff until something bad has happened. So if you have somebody who really hates money and really hates money management and really hates the sort of detailed stuff, don't pick them.
No, no. A little bit off topic. What about a registry for power of attorneys? Are you seeing this right across the country? Because in some jurisdictions, there are no power of attorney registries, and I've seen many cases where there has been abuse. When someone has a power of attorney over quite a number of seniors' accounts, that should be a red flag for the authorities. If there was a registry.
So powers of attorney registries are a funny thing. And sometimes they're really personal planning document registries. The thinking on this has kind of gone back and forth. BC, as an example, has a voluntary registry. It's called NIDIS, and you can register it, right? It's a convenient place that you can register it. And what's good about that is kind of large corporations like financial institutions, or if we're talking about health and personal well-being, kind of the health folks can buy access to it, and that's kind of convenient. That was really revolutionary before kind of mobile phones and apps, right? That was a revolutionary kind of thing. Mostly people have been thinking about keeping it in a digital safe place. So there are more kind of app-based access registries. And as we're starting to finally move legally into some of that more online and technology and digital planning documents, that's starting to come. But there's no place where in this country, if you don't register something, it's not legal. Here's a piece that's really important, though, Leah. And in different jurisdictions, it's a little bit different. So you got to kind of keep an eye out here. While you do not need a lawyer in Ontario, as an example, to do a power of attorney document or a paralegal, you don't need it to be notarized. It doesn't, you can just download it from the Attorney General's website and fill it out. Okay. In many jurisdictions where you're actually trying to sell land, the land titles people will need it actually to be notarized. So if you don't own what they call real property, you may not have as much of a problem. If you can afford to get a lawyer to do it, or even get some legal advice or a paralegal to do it, I really recommend this. It's not just the cost of the document, it's the cost of the advice.
Just following up on what the roles and responsibilities are.
I'm redoing my documents as well. And I'm getting documents done in more than one jurisdiction, because I spend time in Nova Scotia, I spend time in BC, and I spend time in Ontario. And while it is true, and Leo, you know this, that you can get acknowledgement from another, if it's valid in the one jurisdiction in Canada, it's usually going to be recognized in another, but it can be a pain. And so if you are a person that spends time in more than one jurisdiction in the country, you may want to get two done and really get some advice on how to do it. If you're a snowbird, boy, you really want to make sure that you're getting powers of attorney done, and you're going to get some advice on that as well, because you might be in the US or something. What if something happens to you? You really want to make sure that you've got those pieces organized, not just your insurance, but your powers of attorney as well.
Excellent.
Laura, can you speak to what attorneys can't do? Because, we kind of talked about a little about the accounting and what their responsibilities are, but what can't they do? Because we do get a lot of, calls or inquiries about, joint bank accounts, adding their names to things and names to property. So what can't they do?
So they can't make a will for you. So if you are, hit by the bus, you're perfectly capable, hit by a bus, someone else is now doing it. I'll call that person Joe, my attorney Joe. Okay, Joe can do it. I'm incapable. I'm in a coma. And Joe looks around and says, oh my goodness, Laura does not have a will. I better get on that and make her a will. No, Joe, you can't make me a will. So if I'm going to die, don't have a will. I'm going to die intestate. There's nothing you can do. So they cannot make a will. They cannot vary a will. Joe can't look at Laura's will and say, she's unconscious. I don't really think we should leave that much money to Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. I think we should reroute that to the Joe Fund. No, Joe can't do that either. He can't do things that are kind of ethically problematic. So there's a list of stuff you can't do, even if he's financial. You can't kind of, here's an example. This happens all the time. Joe can't show up at the bank and say, you know what? I'm going to add my name as a joint person. I'm going to be Joe, not power of attorney Joe. I'm going to be Joe, the person. And so if I had my own financial bank, let's just say I have $100,000, if only. If I had $100,000, nice easy number, okay? And it's only my account, but Joe is my attorney for property. So Joe's allowed to do that money, but only for my very best interests and only in the ways that I would want it to be done. So paying my bills, maybe there's a bit of gifting. I'm going to give $20 to my nephew. Like Joe has to pretend to be me, wear my shoes. But what Joe can't do is think to himself, you know what she would probably like? She would probably really like it if she gave me all the money. So I'm going to use my power of attorney hat, and I'm going to transfer all that money to my personal account. No, Joe, you can't do that. Here's the other thing you can't do. And this one happens. You got to be really careful.
Yeah.
I'm going to use my power of attorney and add myself as myself onto the account and make it joint. So now that $100,000 is not Laura's, it's Laura and Joe's. And then, so I've transferred ownership. So you can't be mucking around in any of that kind of stuff. What they can do, they can file your taxes. What they can't do, get you divorced, usually. Although there's going to be the odd exception, but mostly, so you can't go, you know what? I never liked your wife anyway. I'm going to get you a divorce. No, you can't do that. No.
We often hear, talking about these, it's about planning ahead, right? As you've talked about before you get hit by the bus or whatever the circumstances are. But talking about the what ifs is not in everybody's bucket list. They don't really prefer to talk about that if it's going to happen. And having these conversations can be difficult conversations. But as you indicate in your book, these are essential conversations to have now. And money is one of those sensitive topics that, for
Absolutely.
good reasons that people don't want to talk about or disclose how much they have. And we've been listening to media just recently talking about this, the transfer of wealth of our senior population. So, we need to protect the financial security. So how do we have the conversations, or how do we encourage family members to have conversations with their adult children or whomever about planning and starting? How do we start that conversation? Like, what would you give people as suggestions to broach the topic, as opposed to, hey, how much money do you have, Mom, just in case something happens to you, right? Because people will say it's not about the money, and yet they do need to protect their financial security.
And it can be uncomfortable, right? And, let's not sit down to a holiday dinner and then talk about this. Okay. So in the book, I give you a whole bunch of different strategies and scripts. Like, if your dad is like this, try it coming at it this way. If your mom is like this, try coming at it this way. So there's a little bit of match the person to the scripts that work. But here's a couple things I would say don't do, and a few that I think can help a lot. Don't do it at a high pressure public dinner. This is not a holiday conversation, okay? Just don't. It never goes well, right? Just don't do it. Do it on a day that actually mostly doesn't mean anything, like Wednesday afternoon, whatever. Something that's not where you're trying to also accomplish something else. Sometimes it's helpful if you're a person that likes regularity. So I use my example of my dad is literally at his accountant's door the minute, like 8 a.m. on the very first day to file his taxes. He wants to get that out of his way. He really likes to get that done. So for him, a strategy that I would say, a person who likes that regularity, I make it part of an annual conversation. Dad, death and taxes, right? Or hit by a bus and taxes, or accidents and taxes, right? You're going to be doing these things anyway. You're going to be filing. Well, he's not filing in April. He's filing in whatever time it is. But, there's a certain time of year where we kind of get our receipts together and acts together, and there's a regularity to it. So that can really help. The other thing that's helpful is you don't make it about anything. You just make it about the time. this time of year, we're doing these things. And that's just how we're doing it. Okay. Here's the other one. It has never, in my view, worked that you come in charging and say, hey, you know what I think you should do? You should do this. Or not even that. Hey, here's what you're going to do. Oh, no. How about this instead? You know, it's that time of year again, or the kids are just graduated, or the little one's just starting high school, or, whatever it is for you, or it's been 10 years since I got married, whatever it is. I think I should probably redo my planning documents, powers of attorney and stuff. I want to do a bit of traveling, maybe, fall down the hill. I want to be ready. I'd love your advice. Do you have yours? Like, could I look at that perhaps? And the good news about it is you should probably be up doing your ones. I'm not saying be facetious about it. Ask your parents advice. They love giving you advice. Another way of coming at it, particularly for people who don't want to talk about kind of aging or even amounts of money, fair enough. Talk about it in terms of the what ifs, but maybe in an active thing. So if your mom is that like yoga mom or hiking up mountains or traveling to Peru, like if she's that person, probably talking to her about decline in dementia is not really going to be the thing that makes her most comfortable. But you could talk about travel insurance. When you're hiking up Machu Picchu, I got thinking about that. Like, what if you're in Peru and all of a sudden something happens? Like, how do I go do that? Oh, okay. Oh, you've got your travel insurance? Great. Maybe we should update the powers of attorney so I know like someone's going to be able to do that, right? So you're meeting them where they're at. And if they're like a hockey person, says your dad's a hockey guy or something like that, has he ever had a concussion? Probably. We've all had a concussion. And so come at it in the way that is empowering for them as opposed to disempowering.
Yeah, wonderful commentary. Laura, let's move on to the risks of abuse and financial exploitation. We've all heard of cases, of course, where mental capacity is questioned. So, a power of attorney, is an issue. So do you want to speak to that in terms of how you can deal with issues like that? And, and given your experience as a lawyer, what type of disagreements have you seen? And is there a reasonable approach to arriving at a decision to protect the rights of an older person? I'm thinking also sometimes that I've seen personally is late life remarriages and all
yes,
that
absolutely.
gets in the way, So can you really speak to this whole piece about the abuse of and exploitation of this whole issue?
Absolutely. I think of it as a continuum, and that's kind of helpful, right? I mean, at the far end of the continuum, those are the guys that are going to be out for it, whether they're fraudsters and they're going to try to get you to give money or whatever else. And I really want to be so clear. The reason why frauds and scams work is because they work, right? So no one should feel ashamed. I got scammed. It was a Facebook marketplace thing. I tried to buy a Murphy bed. It was a reasonable price. In the end, it was a scam, right? Every one of us has had some kind of fraud or scam in our life. But what's different is when you're an older person, often people are afraid to say that they've been scammed because what comes up then is people think, well, maybe they're kind of losing it. Maybe it's a mental capacity issue. At my age, hopefully people aren't thinking as a mental capacity issue. I just, fell for a bit of a scam, and I was able to stop it. But people are more afraid when you're older that it's going to lead to questioning of mental capacity, which, it usually does.
Yeah.
So let's not think about people as being, stupid or naive or whatever, right? Like these are pros and criminals at the very far end. What the other piece that's important to know is there's information being scraped about you all the time by these boiler rooms, okay? And so what may come to you at a phone call or a door knock or a romance scam or even a person who then approaches you at your faith community, it may be informed by lots of pieces of information that are out there. Look, don't go holding yourself up and never go online or anything else. You don't do that. That's not helpful, right? In the end, it's going to make you more vulnerable, not less. But do understand that if someone is going to kind of ask you to do something, I usually say, I'll do it, I'll think about it and come back tomorrow. Never say that you're going to reach out to them, never answer anything at the door. And why I'm saying that now when you're asking about powers of attorney is, from that far end, one of the strategies is to get money at a distance and then approach you close. And when they approach you close, then there's the new best friend that they introduce. And then it's about getting you to change over your documents. So that's one very kind of criminal path in. The far end of that, the exact opposite end of it, is the good-hearted daughter-in-law, nephew, friend who's trying to help you, but isn't really like absolutely knowing what they're supposed to be doing on this one, and is kind of just figuring it out as they go, right? And they're making some wrong decisions. Maybe they're spending some money because they feel like that you would want them to do that, or they're mixing up the money or whatever else. That's quite innocent. They maybe just don't have the training. We don't really train people how to do it. That's elder financial abuse, but it's a very innocent kind of people who are just trying to sort themselves out and do the right thing. There's a lot of stuff in the middle.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And that's where you're asking your question about things like later life marriages and divorces, family dynamics, and so on. And a lot of that stuff in the middle has to do with lack of certainty, right? Who's going to, and maybe about, who mom liked best. I mean, that's a lot of those scenarios, right? So there's a lot of stuff that happens in the middle. And when you're thinking about elder financial abuse, sometimes there's an easy way in and then it gets worse and worse. So that's a strategy. So if you get that debit card tapping, tap, 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 $100, $100, $100, $100, right? It could start off with, well, I'll run your groceries for you or something like that. And then, well, I'm going to pick up some extra groceries for me. That's the kind of innocent stuff. Well, but now I've started getting to do that. Well, now I'm going to do your online banking. Well, maybe I'll just take 10,000 out for this, or maybe I'm going to take 20,000. Well, maybe I'll buy a new car, and actually I'm going to buy a car, but I'll drive the car. I'll drive her around too, but so she'll buy me the car, right? This slippery slope kind of stuff. You got to be paying attention to that. And what I have to say is often the person who's saying somebody else is financially abusing this person is the abuser. That's one of the strategies that abusers will use. They'll say, Susan from BC is the bad daughter and she's abusing mom and she wants to take mom away. And I'm always like, 70% chance Susan's trying to stop you from doing something too. So the dynamics of it are really important to understand. Is this a person that's been in your life a long time? One of the ways that I come at it with people is I ask them, what would you love your life to be? And what do you think would happen if, this person didn't live with you, this person didn't have, what do you think would happen if, what's important to you? And then if you find out that they're using, like, you have to give me the power of attorney document or you don't see the grandkids, you can kind of get into that conversation and understand that there's more going on it than just money.
Laura, I've seen many, many situations whereby you've got conflicts in the family where you've got, say, for example, one daughter who thinks that mom is just fine. She's capable of looking after her affairs. But then the other brother that's named in the power of attorney has already taken over financial matters, and they're, have moved the investments around and start selling off pieces of property. And that really leads to conflicts that get sometimes never resolved and carried right to the grave. So any advice on that as to how we manage that?
One of the important things to think about, I mean, in the best of all possible ways, you'd have all these conversations ahead of time. I think, let's be real, you're probably not having these conversations ahead of time. But to the degree that you can, great, okay? And expectations, those are great. Let's just say, though, that you're a normal family, and that's actually not what's going to happen there as well. I think getting a really clear sense of what, in this case, mom would want is important, because that's what the power of attorney is supposed to do. What is it that mom wants? And then can we get it for her? So maybe mom wants to stay in the house the rest of her life. And so the decision should be that, let's just call it, I'm going to make it the good daughter in this case, Susan, the good daughter, says, but mom said she never wanted to leave the house. She really, so I'm really, and maybe she's even the power of attorney for personal care. And that's the person who's supposed to take the lead. I've costed it out. Mom wants to stay in the house. She said that's really, really important to her. And then you've got, Dan, the financial power of attorney, who's just call him the son for lack of any creativity. And he's like, mom can't afford to stay in the house and she needs to sell the house. And often that's where both of them are trying to do the good thing, right? No one's trying to be bad here, right? Susan's trying to make mom's wishes there, but he's like, it costs $300,000 a year for 24/7 care. Mom doesn't have that money. Also, like the building where she lives is not appropriate for her. She'd be like sleeping in the dining room. Like we actually have to sell the house. And so a lot of the conflict can come because people's desire to either have the status quo. And frankly, I'm a little annoyed with this whole aging in place as the idea of staying in the family home. Like lots of times it's a really bad idea or they can't afford to do it. So let's try to understand what things actually cost to the degree that you can plan for that and understand that you might need to make a move. Then mom maybe needs to get her head in the game earlier and say, oh yeah, maybe I should rent the top floors, or maybe I should remodel, or maybe I should move to a condo ahead of time, right? So those are like two good people trying to do good things, and they bump into each other a lot. And often mom will be like, you want to put me in a home, you want to put me in a retirement home, you're trying to do it, you're the bad person. And he's like, I don't know what you want me to do. I have to help make these decisions for you. And like, you can't stay here. You don't have enough money and you're going to fall down the stairs. So that's one style. The other style that I think is where you get into conflict is where you have two people appointed. And this is a really important for folks listening, right? You can have one person be your attorney for your property decisions. In this case, it would have been Bob, right? You could have two people. Let's imagine Bob and Susan are joint and they have to agree. But Susan's like, I totally don't agree. No way are we selling the house. No way are we going to do it. We're going to, we want to make sure that mom gets all of the 24-hour care. And that's where we're going to spend the money. And he's like, that's not going to work. And I don't agree. And now we're log jammed. Right. So when you're planning your power of attorney for property, I always say, like, if you're going to have somebody joint, two people, and they have to, or three people or eight people, it gets a worse idea the more people you put on this, by the way.
Yes.
Have a backup plan. What happens if they can't agree? And why do you want them to be joint? Is it because you think that one of them needs the advice and support of the other? Okay. Then you could have one person be what we call a monitor, which helps and gives them support, but they're only one decision maker. If you do want two people joint and you want to try to make them agree for some reason that really makes sense to you, have a backup plan. So have what I call a backup break. Okay. In the case where the kids can't agree, it goes to, my next door neighbor. Okay. So you don't wreck the entire power of attorney for property document over one thing. You just say they can't agree on this. And so you have somebody else who does it. Put that in. The last thing I would say is be careful. If you have one person, two or more people, and they all have to agree, the last one's what's called joint and several, which I call it in real world, first to the bank, first to the bed. Doesn't matter who it is, one of the two of them or one of the three of them. Three's a lot. That's fine. So my brother and I are joint and several with my parents. Because I travel with work, he travels with work. They don't really care who it is. We're going to consult, and we have an obligation still to consult with each other, right? And always acting in the best interest. But we're kind of just making it more flexible. So those are really important things, Leo, for people to do. They're thinking about in advance. The last thing I'll say is this. Don't try to fix family problems by appointing people joint on documents, whether it's a will or a power of attorney, because you think that your death or illness is going to bring your kids together. No, people are in their worst when they're in trauma and upset and trying to do the right thing, not the best. So this is not a circumstance to kind of play matchmaker or therapist with using these documents. Imagine people are going to be really traumatized. And in some cases, that's a great reason to tell folks, you know what? I'm actually picking the financial institution to be the power of attorney, or I'm going to pick my friend who's a CPA, because I know that you guys, I want you to be present and paying attention. And I know that it's going to be really difficult for you. And so I'm actually giving you guys the gift of just being present in that and not trying to figure out, do I have to pay the electricity bill?
So I know there's,
yeah,
and there's just a couple things that I was just thinking about is one that we haven't talked about was when you sign it, when it becomes into effect. So what do we, as a safeguard, when we're thinking about some of the great tips you just provided around, do we make it triggered on a certain event or initiative, or as soon as I sign it, then I'm giving John or Bob, whoever, the authority to then go to my bank account? So I'm just wondering about that question first. And then I have another one about when families are not sure about the capacity of mom or dad, and they're arguing, and how do we get that? Who determines that? And that's always a question that we get often. And that process is not it's easy pathways for people.
So I'm not a fan of joint, just to let you know. I'm not a fan because it's not just even that I think if you put your daughter joint on the $100,000 bank account, that all of a sudden they're going to take that money out and go to Brazil, which they totally might do, even because the minute that you put someone joint on it, it means they own it as well. You could say, well, I didn't really mean to. I kind of meant that she wouldn't really own it. But she's in Brazil. And so by the time you try to get it back, good luck on that, right? If you put it joint, it means you're actually conveying ownership to both of you. If you want them to run your money for you, that's a power of attorney. Why I also don't like joint is not just because it actually gives somebody the money or gives them the asset. You put joint on a house, it means you're transferring the house to their name as well as your name, and that you both own it. And yes, they can draw money out of that house, or they're allowed to do that. Sometimes people are like, well, I trust my kids, I trust my friend, I'll trust my whatever. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Here's the other alternative. What about their spouse that you don't like? How's their marriage going, right? And then, what are you talking about? Because once you're joint on an asset, it means that it's in the family assets as well. So let's just say that my mom, which she hasn't put me joint on an account, or the house, right? Well, if I break up with my husband, those assets are now in our marriage breakdown divorce. Mom could lose the house because I get divorced. Those are kinds of things people don't realize. What if there's a guarantee on a loan for a business? Well, mom could lose the house for a guarantee. So I'm really not a fan of joint. Be very careful if you're going to do that. Brianne, the other question you asked was?
About who assesses capacity?
Who assesses capacity?
Somebody says,
Yeah, very important. Okay,
capable.
so the flippant answer is everybody all the time, but that's not really kind of what we're asking. Now, that's important because, we've all assessed capacity. Someone comes to your house for dinner, they've had a glass of wine or two, you kind of look at them, you're thinking, I know you think you can drive home. I don't think you can drive home. You're assessing their capacity to drive, right? What about if you're assessing someone's, ability to do algebra? I could look at my kid if they were in grade 3, and I would look at, grade 11 algebra, and I'm assessing, do they have the capacity to do that? That's a different thing, right? I am always assessing that. If you are a financial planner or a lawyer or a doctor or a healthcare provider of any kind, every time I have my client or patient in front of me, I'm always trying to find out, do you have the ability to understand the information I'm giving you about the surgery, about the interest rates, about whatever it is we're talking about? Do you have the ability to understand the information? And can you appreciate the consequences of doing or not doing something? Here's the trick. Just because you can understand and appreciate doesn't mean that you're going to actually do what they want you to do. Right? I always joke, my kids throw all their stuff in the hockey gear or whatever else in the front hall. They understand they're not supposed to leave it there because I'm going to flip over it. And they can appreciate that I'll get mad if they don't move their hockey gear, but they have never moved their hockey gear. They do it time and time again. Same kind of thing. You need to show the ability to do it, not that you're actually going to do it. Vegas exists for bad decisions, but it still exists, right? So the answer, though, for a more medical question, what if you think, something's wrong with that for real? Like you think that there's something going on there. First thing to know is people who have capacity issues, they know they have capacity issues. They may not know it the same way that you know it, but they're looking for their words or whatever else. Dementia is not sitting in your car holding and looking for your car keys in your handbag or whatever. That's not dementia, or you put them in the house. Dementia is sitting in the car holding your key for your car in your car, and you can't figure out what the relationship between the key and the car is, right? Like, so it's not forgetfulness in the sense that you don't know where you put something, or people say, oh, I'm having a senior moment, or maybe it's dementia. No, it's a very specific thing. In Ontario, we're different than other jurisdictions. Okay. It's important to know. So if you're from another jurisdiction listening to it, it's going to be a bit of a different answer. You can actually hire a private pay capacity assessor. You look up the capacity assessment office, and they're all private contractors, kind of like therapists or whatever. You can hire them and they cost different amounts in different ways, or physiotherapists, right? It's a private relationship. It's a private contract. You have to pay for it. How much does it cost? Well, depends how complicated, how many answers are you asking? Because you need to ask capacity to do what? Is it capacity to make a will that you're trying to check? You're trying to capacity to get divorced? Are you trying to figure out capacity to do your high level finances versus your everyday banking? You have to ask a series of questions, and they'll check, right? The trick here is you need to make sure that the person is going to agree to being assessed. Okay, so you're paying money, $500, $1,500, $2,000, depends on what you're asking and where they are and what they charge. If I'm the person that they're worried about, you know what? Like, Laura's decision making is a little dodgy right now. Maybe we should get a capacity assessment. Maybe, there's some other things. She had a stroke not that long ago, or maybe there's some early Parkinson's going on. Let's get a capacity assessment. And maybe actually we want to do it because we want to do some personal planning documents, or who knows what. Well, you can go to the trouble of hiring the person, paying the person. But if I don't want to get my capacity assessed, I don't have to.
Say no.
Absolutely.
And that's an important thing, right? They can't force me to get a capacity assessment. A court can. A judge can force a capacity assessment. Public guardian trustee can force a capacity assessment. But on the whole, otherwise not.
We do find some people say, well, the doctor is going to do the financial capacity assessment. And
they're really
they wrote a letter of opinion. For instance, we get people saying, well, the doctor said, they saw the person and they've given us a letter of opinion. And is that a valid way of triggering a PoA? So, we know that it depends on everything. I think that's the caveat in this whole conversation. It all depends, right? But these are, it is a complex issue, and each individual situation has to be assessed.
Absolutely. So people know the words like an MMSE, a mini mental status exam. That's a snapshot question. Doesn't determine if you've got a mental capacity issue. It's just a litmus test to see if there's some things that they should look into. Okay. Some people will know they call the mocha, not the kind that you drink. That's the McGill test. That was the one they did on Trump. Apparently he passed it better than anyone's ever passed it in the whole world before. I wonder about that. That is a deeper test. The MOCA is a deeper test to kind of check things out. The gold standard is what we would call a clinical interview with a geriatric psychiatrist. There's about 200 in the country, a bunch of them in Ontario. That is the gold standard. Geriatric psychiatrist will do a clinical interview, and they'll do some of the standardized tests as well. That's a health perspective. And a GP on the whole doesn't have always the training. I would say rarely has the training unless they've got some specialized interest in it as well. I've seen things that make my head roll back, because I've seen like a doctor, like a GP who maybe doesn't even know the person, put things like, in my opinion, Bob doesn't have mental capacity. No, that's not mental capacity for what? And on what basis? And what did you do? And how did you ask questions? So that is not appropriate, and courts do not like that. If you have a continuing power of attorney in other jurisdictions called a durable power of attorney in the US, an enduring power of attorney in Canada, it starts right away. Continuing powers of attorney starts right away. So if I am taking care of my mom's stuff when she falls off Machu Picchu. I can just take care of stuff. I don't need to spring a power of attorney document into a force. I can use it and then not use it with her permission because she's a capable person and she can check what I'm doing, right? Ideally. And if she doesn't like the job I'm doing, she can fire me until she becomes mentally incapable. And then that becomes hard. The other kind, which is not the default, you have to choose to do this, is to have it start springing into effect after like a capacity assessment or something else. So that's like you get a credit card in the mail. It's got that number, you can't use it until you dial that 1-800 number and spring it into effect. In this case, that 1-800 number springing is that mental capacity assessment, but you've just heard the problems. If I don't want to get a mental capacity assessment done, you can't force me usually. And it's really hard. And then people say, well, what am I supposed to do? That really becomes difficult. So a continuing one is easier. And this is only for property again, not for personal care, right? Only for property. It's easier if you make it start right away, then that person can. Having said that, if you're a capable person, it's you that still decides. You just have the convenience of the other person. The bank should still be calling and checking with you. The lawyer should still be calling and checking with you. Those things should still be calling to check with you. You're still capable. Which is better? Depends on what you're trying to solve for.
Laura, before we leave our conversation here today, you certainly offered up a lot of great advice, but I got a couple of questions really.
Yes.
What would you consider your 3 key points, your 3 key pieces of advice for our listeners today to consider when setting up a power of attorney to ensure that their wishes are carried out and that their finances are protected? And the other question I have is, do you have resources from your agency or elsewhere that you would suggest our listeners check out after this podcast?
I'll start with the last one first. Yes. So CanAge has lots of great free resources. Everything we have is free, like Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, easily found. You can also find great materials through Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. I've got lots of stuff online, me personally. There's lots of great resources out there, and they're really good. The second piece I would ask, kind of for people to think about is do some of those planning workbooks, and you can find them. Often your financial institution will have them if you're doing that make a will or making a power of attorney. If you have a lawyer that you like who does estates work, I'm a big fan of going to a lawyer who specializes in estate planning rather than just a general lawyer who does everything. I really appreciate that. They usually have workbooks to help you set things through. If you can afford to get some legal planning advice, it's worth its weight in gold. Like I would say to add 3 zeros onto it, because it really is the advice. It's not the thing, right? It's the advice. It's not the thing. The last thing I would just say is this: don't make it about being old. Don't make it about being demented. Make it about, you're more than 18 years old. Anything could happen at any point. You cross that street, get hit by the bus. So every person over the age of 18 should have one of these.
Right. And that's the whole, purpose of the podcast is to empower people as they're aging, right? These issues affect everybody at all stages of after 18, obviously with the powers of attorney for property, but, planning ahead is so important, and having these conversations with our parents, and our children, so they know what our wishes are. I think that's the other piece, is that what would people guess? Oh, what did mom want? I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Did she want that bank account? Right. So,
we call it the margarita peach approach. Unless you tell people what you actually want, you're going to get the less. You're going to get the smallest kind of decision. You're going to get the cheese pizza. You're not going to get the everything on it or the pineapple, which I think is a horrible idea anyway. You should never have pineapple. Contentious thing. But what I would say is, if you can't speak about it, do something like, well, you have in my family. I jokingly call it the death drawer, although it should be called hit by a bus drawer. My mom doesn't want to talk about health and personal finance and whatever, but whenever she has a thought, she puts it in this one drawer, and I know to go because she'll wake up at 3 a.m. and put an idea in. All I ask her to do is date it, because the person needs to do the last, most recent set of thoughts. So even if they don't want to talk to you, they can write it down. It's not more magical if it's written down. It's about whatever is most recent. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. Great to have CanAge.ca, CanAge.ca. And I think that these series are really important. They're great ways to start a conversation, but it's not a one and done thing, right? I usually think it's an annual thing. Think about your death and taxes. Or in this case,
we have one
hit by a bus.
last question, Laura, that we've been asking all of our guests as they leave is,
You bet.
what advice would you give to someone to age vibrantly, no matter what age? Or there could be a senior or a younger person.
Okay, so there's two ways I would answer this, right? There's the eat right and exercise answer. Okay. Right? I mean, we all know we're supposed to eat right and exercise. It's true. It's not a surprise. It's actually the recipe for a lot of things in life, right? How do you be more flexible? How do you, look better in your clothes? How do you yeah, okay, you should eat right and exercise. Okay. Besides that, it's really important for you to have social connections more than anything else, more than eating right and exercise. I would say it's about your relationships. And I think of it as a 3, 5, and 15. 3 relationships that you can call and reach out to if you need help, that really you can talk to in some way. You don't have to talk to them every day, but you really know you can. 5 people in your social network that you could do things with, or, a walking club, or you could just pop by and say, hey, and talk about, the events of the day over a cup of coffee, but you can have a conversation with. And 15 people in your broadest network that you could bump into. It could be the guy who delivers your mail. It could be, someone you're walking your dog with. That 3, 5, 15, 3 close relationships, 5 people to talk to, and 15 people in your network is kind of magic. And above all, unless you actually have a network of people, whether in person or virtually, some of these conversations don't matter because you won't have anyone to appoint.
That's great. Yeah, great advice. Thank you. So I want to thank you again for taking the time to be with us today and sharing your knowledge and expertise in this area. And it's always a pleasure to have you with. These are difficult conversations, and you kind of bring a different perspective and lightheartedness, but also serious implications as well in terms of getting the information across for people to understand. So, thank you and all your advocacy work for enhancing the lives of older Canadians is to be commended, and we thank you for that. And we challenge our listeners to go and search out the legislation and laws in their area that they reside in. As Laura mentioned, it's different in every region, province, territory, country. To look at that, have these conversations, they are essential. And look for Laura's book. You'll find that in our show notes as well, where you can get a copy of it. I know I have mine. It's just right over here.
Anywhere, any bookstore, any place to get your podcasts. All right. Talk to everybody.
Let's talk about aging. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you again, Laura, for joining us today and imparting your knowledge and expertise. Your leadership is truly transforming conversations on aging and is so inspirational. You've taken the complex legal issue of powers of attorney and simplified it for our listeners to clearly understand what a POA is, considerations when choosing an attorney, enlightening us with strategies to manage conflict and difficult decisions when family dynamics don't always see eye to eye, and most importantly, how older adults can protect their rights and wishes to live with dignity and respect as they age. Laura, your advocacy work is truly enhancing the lives of seniors across Canada. Before we finish, I want to encourage our listeners to empower them by learning more about powers of attorney and the legislation that pertains in their own province and territory. A wonderful website resources to get you started is by the Canadian Centre for Elder Law, entitled The Practical Guide to Elder Abuse and Neglect in Canada. It's a searchable website available in both French and English that explains the laws related to elder abuse and neglect occurring wherever you live in Canada. To find more information on powers of attorney and the links to these resources and more, please visit our show notes. You can also find more resources on Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario's website at eapon.ca. Be sure to check other podcasts on our YouTube channel or wherever you listen to our podcast. Don't forget, if you enjoyed our Aging Vibrantly podcast, the best way to show your support and to help us grow is to subscribe, like, share, and rate our show and leave us a review. This podcast is funded by the Government of Canada's New Horizons for Seniors program and is produced by Todd Miller of The Podcast Expert with the support of Lisa Whitfield, our project coordinator. Until next time, stay vibrant.